All right, Sylvie, challenge accepted. La Magnifica Sylvie La Chardonnière of the West Kingdom has issued a challenge to all the cooks, cooking novices, and cooking curious of the known world. This is the second weekly SCA Virtual Classroom Cooking Challenge. Today's recipe is to make a tart, and it comes from the Goodman of Paris, which is a late 14th century French household guide, which also includes some recipes. So let's start out by taking a look at our recipe. As you might expect, the original manuscript is in French, not modern French, old French. But Sylvie was kind enough to post a translation. Whenever we're working from translations, it's really nice to actually read through several different translations to see if there are differences in the way that the translator interpreted words. But we'll go ahead and read through the Eileen Power translation, which is the one that was actually posted for the challenge. To make a tart, take 4 handfuls of beets, 2 handfuls of parsley, a handful of chervil, a sprig of fennel, and 2 handfuls of spinach, and pick them over and wash them in cold water, and then cut them up very small, then bray with 2 sorts of cheese, to wit, a hard and a medium, and then add eggs thereto, yolks and whites, and bray them in with the cheese. Then put the herbs in the mortar and bray all together, and also put therein some fine powder. Or instead of this, have already brayed in the mortar 2 heads of ginger, and onto it bray your cheese, eggs, herbs, and then cast old cheese, scraped or grated, onto the herbs, and take it to the oven to have your tart made, and eat it hot. Okay, so this sounds like a pretty straightforward recipe. Take a bunch of green things. Whenever we hear beets in a medieval recipe, they are probably talking about the greens, unless it's a very late period. So take a bunch of green things, grind them together, put in some cheese, some eggs, make a tart. Pretty straightforward. All right, so let's take a look at our ingredients. So the first one is 2 handfuls of beets. I'm kind of allergic to beets, so I actually chose to use chard. I picked this out of my parents' yard this morning while I was doing my no contact grocery drop off. And then we have some spinach from the farmer's market this morning, some parsley. So I couldn't get a hold of any chervil, and then when I was looking up what a substitution would be, they said parsley, so I think we're okay since we've got plenty in our recipe. We've got a sprig of fennel. There is less fennel than all of the other green ingredients, so I think they are wanting that to be a little bit of flavor. It's got a little bit of kind of a licoricey flavor, so that's going to add to our dish. Let's look at our cheeses. So the cheese was actually probably the place where the translations varied the most between the 3 I could look at. So Eileen Power translated this as 1 hard, 1 medium cheese. And then Janet Henson, now her translation is available if you go to medievalcookery.com. You will actually find a link to her full translation of the recipe section of this manuscript, which is very cool. It's available online for free, so you can go and explore it. So she actually said 1 mild, 1 medium. And then, so I was like, well, those are drastically different. 1 hard, 1 mild. That doesn't make sense. So I sent a note to my good friend Gwen and asked if he could look in the translation he had at home, which was translated by Greco and Rose. It's a wonderful translation that is a little bit more recent. And they said 1 soft, 1 medium. So I feel like we're a little bit all over the board, but it made more sense if we had a softer or a fresher cheese, a medium cheese, and then at the end they're having us top it with a aged cheese. Some of the other translations were a little bit more specific, that we wanted something that had been salted and pressed. I have chosen the following cheeses. For my mild or soft cheese, I went with kind of a newer cheese. So I've got it like a queso fresco. And then for my medium cheese, I've got a Gruyere. And then for my aged cheese, I've got a 12-year aged Comité, which is a type of French cheese that I thought would be really tasty. So as usual, I've got an egg from my chickens. And so the different translations also described the spices differently. Powers says fine spice. Others just said spices. I had decided to use a little bit of powder fort, which I have left over from last week's challenge. So those are my ingredients. You will notice there is not a crust. There's not flour, there's not butter, there's not eggs. There's a reason for that. I thought the instruction, carry it to the oven and then make it into a tart and eat it hot, was really interesting. And most of the time, people will tell you there aren't pie dough recipes in early cookbooks because everybody knew how to make them. And as a trained pastry chef, I was like, I wonder if that's the truth. I tend to think that we describe it less because it was not the cook's job. And I'm kind of supported by these French manuscripts. So I looked through and wanted to take a look and be like, does this seem reasonable? And there's a whole note about northern pies that includes the line, when the pie maker takes them uncooked to the oven. And then later describes kind of a marrow ball filling, and it says to cut the marrow into small round balls or billets and take it to the pie maker, who puts them 4 and 4 or 3 in each pastry. So for me, that really kind of was a good indicator that making the actual pie dough was separate from making the filling. So I looked in Du Fat de Cuisine, which is from about 1420 France. And that one also has a recipe where they are advising you how to make the filling. And then it says to deliver the filling to the pastry cook and advise him that the crust should be very small and fairly high. So I'm going to skip over the part where I made the crust because in the context of this recipe, not my job. Okay, so I have chopped my green things. I have grated my medium cheese, which is that Gruyere. And I have kind of crumbled up my soft cheese, and it's in my mortar. And now we're just going to bray everything together. So first we'll kind of break down this cheese. I think this is a good marriage between being soft, which I do take to mean a little bit newer, and being mild. So we have our cheese, our other cheese. You can tell that I'm not maybe making the entire recipe. Part of it is I only have, this is my biggest mortar and pestle, and part of it is, it's just me and a dog. So, and I don't think he likes spinach that much. So I scaled down the recipe just a little bit. Okay, so we have our cheeses. I'm going to add just a teeny bit of salt. Put our egg in. Okay. And get that kind of mixed in. So I know some people really took the interpretation to be closer to a quiche. I wanted this to be a little bit closer. Well, I'm not sure what it's close to, but I thought that the egg didn't feel like the main feature. So I am choosing to use just one egg in my half recipe. Okay. So we have egg and cheese, and then we're going to add in our herbs. We may run out of room, but you know what? We're going to live. One of the other things in this recipe is it did not have us cook the greens first. They're kind of going into the cheese and egg mixture raw, and then they'll actually cook with the tart. So you can see this is very messy business when one is trying to use not really a big enough container, but it's what we have. So, this one's kind of nicely mixed together. So, I think the spices are next. Okay, now that our filling is made, we are ready to carry it to the oven and then make it into a tart. And then we can eat it hot. So, as I said before, I strongly believe that the actual making of the crust of the tart was probably not the cook's job. So, we have taken this to our pastry cook. If you are curious, this tart shell, I can't have gluten, so it is made with gluten-free flour, eggs, salt, and a little bit of butter. I actually could not find any specific tart recipe or like tart dough recipes from this particular period, so early. So I did find the earliest references I could find did recommend making, if you wanted to make a short dough, which I did, that you can make it short with eggs or fat. So I chose to use both. Okay, so we're just gonna spread our filling out. Could I have added more eggs and made this thinner? Sure. Do I think it's gonna be super tasty with all of this lovely cheese and greens? Absolutely. Probably some little chunks of cheese, but we're gonna live. Okay, so now I'm going to top it with my aged cheese, which is not going to be able to grade in that big chunk. So this is kind of a strong cheese, and I think it's going to be really tasty on top with all of that spinach. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and put this in the oven. I am not using a wood burning oven. I am using my modern oven, and so I'm going to put it in at 375 for 10-15 minutes, and then we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so it ended up taking a little bit more like 20 minutes to bake, but our tart is hot out of the oven, and let's give it a try. So you can see it is a lot of cheese and a little bit of herbs. It is has a little bit of structure from the egg. We'll see what it tastes like. They told us to eat it hot. I'll bet this would be really good cold also. All right, so it is a lot of cheese. It's the herbs are fairly mild. It probably could have done with a little bit more spices, but maybe I will just do a little pinch sprinkle right on top, just to kind of kick that flavor up. Thank you for joining me. As always, it is really fun to explore medieval cooking and see how the dishes that they made feel for us. Thanks.